Right, today I want to do a quick video questioning the legitimacy of the NATO intervention in Libya earlier this year. There are several different reasons why I feel it's an illegitimate war, one that shouldn't be supported. The first is, if you look through history, America has often intervened in other people's civil wars, and the results have been pretty detrimental. Possibly the earliest being the Korean War. After World War II, the two halves of Korea were occupied in the north by the Soviet Union and the south by the USA, and they both set up kind of puppet regimes, and it led to, as relations between the US and the USSR grew more sour, it eventually led to the war, of course. And now, it's generally said that the North attacked the South first, but this could be justified for humanitarian reasons in the same way as the Libya war is justified for humanitarian reasons, because the South's dictator, who Partly Chung or something like that, he was basically massacring communists in his country. So Kim Il-sung could be justified in having tried to rescue the people in the south. I'm not sure if that's the actual reason he did it, because it was a surprise attack, so there wasn't really much of a preamble to the invasion. And it continued on with various sort of Cold War proxy wars, some of which turned out pretty disastrously, including Vietnam, where the Americans actually lost. Many people died and the country was heavily polluted. In the Cold War in 1991, they actually incited a civil war and then didn't back it up. There was a Kurdish uprising in the north in 1991 and a Shia Muslim uprising in the south, which, again, they sort of instituted one of these no-fly zones, but nothing really came of it. I guess because they didn't have mass support and weren't able to combat Saddam properly. Of course, in the 1980s, there was the support for the Afghan Islamists, including some people who would graduate into the Taliban and into Al-Qaeda, who were trained by the CIA. They were trained to fight the Soviet Union when they were occupying Afghanistan. And of course, various terrorist bombings that happened throughout the 90s, and of course leading up to September 11th, 7/7, and all this other bullshit. Let's look at some of the other reasons. Gaddafi's alleged human rights abuses. While I have no doubt that he probably did shoot quite a lot of protesters, which certainly was not the only person. It happened in Egypt, happened in what's happening in Yemen and Syria, and even Iraq, which is supposed to be free now. In Iraqi Kurdistan, they were shooting Kurdish protesters. So, yeah. Why Libya? Well, Libya's got shitloads of oil. But the thing is, now even Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International is starting to question whether Gaddafi really is guilty of these accusations of mass rape, of massacres, and bombing civilians indiscriminately. I'm sure NATO has definitely killed more civilians than it's let on, because these bombings aren't as precise as they'd like you to believe. I mean, if you look at the Iraq War, the media was all over that. Just in the Battle of Fallujah, they killed 1,000 civilians in just the space of a few weeks, I think. And there are numerous examples like that throughout history of American foreign involvement, or NATO foreign involvement. I mean, God knows how many civilians they killed in the Kosovo War. And there again, there's another example of they got involved in someone else's civil war or war of independence, whichever you prefer. And they backed one side, which I believe was the Kosovo Liberation Army, who conducted ethnic cleansing and mass rape and massacres. There's been accusations towards the rebels that they've been targeting sort of black African migrant workers for imprisonment and assassination on the accusation that they're mercenaries working for Gaddafi, or that they're spies or something. How much proof there is to these things, I'm not sure, but there's definitely some. There's no smoke without fire. And again, there's kind of a martial police state being set up in the rebel side of town as well. They're kind of hunting down Gaddafi supporters or people who used to work for Gaddafi, and I don't know what they're doing with them. Maybe they're executing them, maybe they're interrogating them. Who knows for sure. The problem is that we don't know enough about the rebels to know whether they're worth supporting. I mean, they stand up for kind of democracy, but they don't have it in their own areas. And basically, it all kind of runs down to the rebels are too weak to really be any kind of effective fighting force or force for taking down Gaddafi. I mean, we were stocking Gaddafi with weapons for years, tanks and jet fighters and missiles and artillery pieces in exchange for cheap oil. So, and now we've just kind of turned on him. And instead of the UN trying to push for peace, which is what it's supposed to, it's come out on the side of one side and someone else's kind of foreign war. And we don't know what the results are going to be from that. It's definitely a war of aggression, it's a war of regime change, which is another example of mission creep. I mean, it was supposed to be just a no-fly zone to make sure that Gaddafi wasn't fielding any jet fighters or anything like that, or helicopters against the rebels. And now it's suddenly turned to regime change, and people are starting, governments are starting to question that. For example, Italy, I believe recently, was talking about, trying to go for a peace plan. We should stop the bombing, try and get humanitarian aid in. And, it kind of makes me laugh. We've got this drought in East Africa, I think. I'm not sure exactly which countries there are. I think it might be Sudan or something like that. They've got this massive drought where hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people are at risk of dying from not having enough water. And if you compare the number of people at risk from being killed by Gaddafi and the number of people at risk from the drought, it comes out that the people at risk from Gaddafi are tiny compared to the people at risk from the drought. And if you look at the cost of fielding this war against Gaddafi and the cost of bringing water and aid to these people who are starving for natural reasons, with the money they're spending bombing Gaddafi, they could probably save millions of people. But I guess the war is more TV friendly. So there you go. But the other thing is, I think Libya is a pretty strategic location, right in the middle of the Mediterranean coast on the southern side. North Africa, good bridge to the Middle East and Egypt, and the rest of Africa, of course. Shitloads of natural resources and oil. A very low population. It's only about 6 or 7 million people. Very easy to control and very easy to put into debt. So the Libyans seem pretty screwed. This is why I said in my last video that their response should be to first and foremost, their first and foremost priority should be to get NATO out and stop the fighting, and then agitate for kind of more democratic rights through that route, or some kind of system change. Um, you know, the other matter is that I think these days people are getting really sick of the United States and NATO acting like the world's policeman, invading whoever they like, attacking whoever they like, for the most convenient reasons they can think of. Um, I mean, you might as well call it humanitarian intervention. Hitler invaded the Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia in the 1930s for humanitarian reasons, because he said that ethnic Germans were at risk, that they were kind of being abused. Was that true? Who knows? You know, I don't think it is true, but you know, it's hardly you could. That's the problem with the kind of the modern media. You can make it look like everyone in Libya supports Gaddafi, or you can make it look like everyone supports the rebels. And I think it's pretty 50-50. The revolution in Libya never caught on because things that people were. It was mostly a petty bourgeois revolution. That's the problem. Um, it was started in the interests of certain sections of society, but not society as a whole. And this is unsurprising because as a revolution, it had no ideology, it had no plan. It was just the same as in Egypt, just get Mubarak out, more democratic rights. There's a lot of people who are benefiting from Gaddafi's regime, from his economic policies. Libya was one of the richest countries in Africa. It was one of the most developed countries in Africa. By the time this war is done, it's going to be nothing. It's going to be desert, a few ruins, which people cling around and try and rebuild from. But the country's going to be completely fucked by the time NATO's done with it. It's going to be poor. It's going to be in debt to the IMF, the World Bank. They're going to loan it money. That money is going to be spent on paying for, no doubt, American or European companies to come in and rebuild it. They'll be taking home the profits, and ordinary Libyans will be working to try and pay off the debt for this war, this bombardment of their own country. So, and what for? Just so that Europe can get cheaper oil quicker. I mean, Gaddafi was working with them. That's the other thing. Gaddafi was with them on the war on terror. He was one of the first people to condemn the 9/11 attacks. You know, he took apart his weapons of mass destruction program as soon as it happened, possibly because you know he saw what happened to Saddam. He didn't want it happening to him.